Hello? Welcome to Night, where the dark speaks and true stories haunt. This channel brings you real horror experiences, urban legends, and chilling encounters that people have truly lived through. Every episode is based on actual stories, told in a way that pulls you into the shadows. From haunted houses to unsolved disappearances, strange family secrets to ancient curses, we explore the kinds of stories that leave you questioning what's real. Perfect for late night listening or a lonely commute home. Subscribe and let the night in. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Story 1. When we moved into our house, we found a calendar on the wall. Every year, the same 3 days are marked. Don't go out. My husband Toby and I mightn't have even noticed it for a while if we hadn't moved into our new house early in the year. Moving in the crisp, frigid air of early February was much preferable to wiping sweat from our brows, whilst we hauled box after box from vans parked outside during the summer as we had many years prior. We walked through the giant oak doors that beckoned us into what we hoped would be our forever home, and beyond the hallway into the living room when my husband quipped, "Was that there before?" When we had our viewing, I quickly scanned the space before me and shot him a confused look. I never did have good eyesight, nor was I the most observant person. He raised a hand and pointed toward the wall directly opposite us, where a large calendar faced us. The place was unfurnished because we wanted to make it fully our own, and the moving company could only deliver our stuff the day after moving. So there wasn't anything to see beyond the bare-bones skeleton of the house when we had our viewing. It did look out of place amongst the naked walls, but I still didn't take much note of it. For whatever reason, though, my husband did, and dropped the bag strapped along his shoulder to take a look. Again, it may have been my eyesight, but he seemed to spot the dark red circle around one of the dates from where we were originally standing. "Hey, what do you reckon that date is marked for?" he wondered out loud. I walked up beside him and took a look for myself. "I dunno, maybe it's a birthday or something." I spoke, my tone indicating my tiredness and desire to just go to bed. "Yeah, maybe, but what's that doing here?" "It wasn't here for the viewing, and some dude's birthday has nothing to do with us," Toby said, ever inquisitive. Overly, so when I was already tired. He began to flick through the rest of the months, and with a voice tinged with something beyond his usual excitement announced that 2 other dates had been circled in that same red font, along with some writing neither of us had noticed to that point. He always did love a good mystery, no matter how small. 3 dates were marked across the year, and into the next. And the next, February 6th, June 19th, September 21st. "Don't go out," faintly written beneath each. Despite my reluctant intrigue and notice of his atypical demeanor, I told him that as much as I enjoyed diving into rabbit holes with him, I was too tired to play the guessing game that night, and we promptly carried our suitcases and backpacks up to the master bedroom and got ready for bed. The next morning, I woke up to Toby sitting on the couch from our old place the movers must have delivered and arranged as paid for whilst I was still asleep. He was facing the calendar and scrawling something onto a notepad as my footsteps came within his earshot. He looked up at me and with that ever-comforting smile that never failed to reach his eyes welcomed me into our new living room. Only the basics of our old furniture were arranged, and we still needed to organize a lot of the more aesthetic stuff ourselves. But it felt like home. After a brief conversation, he got down to business. He had already exhausted his search for a connection between the 3 dates and was trying to find one himself. I'd lived with and loved my investigative Toby for many years, but I'd never seen him like this. It was obsession at first glance. As I have admitted, the entire thing stirred up a quietly ominous curiosity within me. 2. Something wasn't quite right with that calendar. Why those dates? Why can we go out? Ever a head-in-the-sand skeptic, I put it down to a joke of some sort, or something left behind by somebody between our viewing and move-in dates. I told myself and Toby over and over, the simplest explanations are always closest to the truth. Nevertheless, his breathless expedition into this particular unknown continued, and as February the 6th crept up on us, he remained no closer to the answer he was digging for. So he came up with a plan. After reluctantly agreeing to go along with the whole staying inside for the day rule, mostly to humor him, and a tiny bit to give him a playful, smug look when his plan amounted to nothing, he asked me to join him on a neighborhood watch. Essentially, he planned to sit by the large window overlooking the lawn and the row of houses across from us all day. He wanted to see if any of the neighbors, who after exchanging the usual pleasantries would once we had settled in, he quickly probed about the existence of their own odd calendars, to which they let him know that it came with the house, and to kindly never mention this again, would go about their days regardless of what the strange calendar said. We turned the couch around and sat for hours, talking at first about the new house and the calendar, wondering what it all meant and why every neighbor politely but sternly warned us to not talk about its existence. As the day went on and we grew bored of the guessing game and the silent street we looked out onto, we moved on to recalling the day we met and the many days we'd had together since. It became romantic, intimate, the two of us sitting there entangled in a conversation like that against a scene of life in a sleepy, peaceful suburb. But then Mr. Hudson from across the street went outside. He and his wife had been living in the neighborhood for quite some time, so we went over to introduce ourselves a few weeks prior. It all looked fine at first. We peered more intently through our blinds as he lit a cigarette and took a long, hard drag before obscuring his weathered face in the exhale of smoke that followed. And just as that cloud took his face out of our focus, he vanished, dematerialized. The cigarette remained suspended, the faint daylight glow of the flame that lit it pulsating in an inconceivable fashion. It dwindled until nothing much remained beyond the filter, and as trivially as he had disappeared. Mr. Hudson was standing on his lawn again, burnt-out cigarette clung between his fingers as if he had been there the entire time. Toby stared at me with an intense horror that my own eyes must have conveyed too, and neither of us spoke until Mr. Hudson had walked back into his and his wife's house. "Did I, just see that, right?" he whispered, voice tainted with a deep unease. Unable to form any words, I only nodded in response as to say I had seen the same thing. We silently agreed to stop watching. Neither of us wanted to see any more of whatever this was. The rest of that day was spent quietly ruminating with shuttered blinds and a blanket of something profoundly wrong shrouding the house. After far too long, February the 7th finally unshackled us, and with much trepidation, we decided we needed to take the short walk across the street. We needed to talk to the Hudsons. Just as soon as the final echo of my knock rang out, Mrs. Hudson's kind old lady demeanor greeted us. What a pleasant surprise. "How can I help you boys?" she said, her face plastered with a smile that stretched a little too wide, and with Mr. Hudson greeting us with a wave from a few feet behind her. I let Toby lead the conversation. This was his mystery to solve in the first place after all. Even if I become wrapped up in it too, he hesitated before replying. "We're sorry to bother Mrs. Hudson, but did Mr. Hudson leave the house yesterday? We, are a little concerned about something we saw." She remained steadfast in maintaining her outward appearance, but something in her eyes stirred. Her reply was subtly tinted with fear, subtly enough that neither of us would have caught it if not for the equally subtle change in her eyes. But still she replied, "My Bill? No, sweetie, I'm afraid you must be confused," before craning her head backwards and loudly asking Bill, "Will you turn the stove off, please? We don't want your favorite soup to burn, do we?" After which Mr. Hudson disappeared from the background of our view into the hallway, and in that sliver of opportunity she had conjured, she spoke to us with a tone of the utmost urgency. "The whispers will get you. Leave before they do, or it'll be too late." Mr. Hudson reappeared faster than he should have, and must have caught the dread-filled looks on our faces, because he asked if we were okay, if we want to come in for some soup. "It'll damn sure make you look better," he proclaimed. We declined, said goodbye as politely as we could manage, and struggled through unsteady legs to make the walk back across the street before closing and locking the front door. The next night, as we watched the house across from us once again, all the lights behind the curtained windows shimmered on and off for untold minutes, before finally sputtering off and staying that way. We never saw Mrs. Hudson again. Our calls to the police after days of imitating the ill-fated neighborhood watch not long prior yielded no results. In fact, they reassured us after a visit that no Mrs. Hudson ever existed. William Hudson inherited the house from his father and never married. If we hadn't had each other and our collective experience to rely on, I don't believe either of us would have remained particularly convinced of our own sanity. We wanted to heed Mrs. Hudson's advice, but we had just bought the place. Still, we quietly searched for a new home. Neither of us wanted to be here for the next marked date, but then the whispers started. Only one of us heard them, and it wasn't me. I held Toby in my arms when he woke up screaming. I comforted him when he heard voices from within the walls. I put the house up for sale and began to pack our things when he stopped being able to function. All he could do was listen to the whispers. He said they beckoned him outside, told him something wonderful was waiting for him out there, and all he had to do, unlock the front door and step outside to see it all for himself. Yesterday was June the 19th, our second marked day together. I tried so hard to stop him, but he's always been the bigger one, the stronger one. He got past me anyway. I watched as he flickered out of this existence and into somewhere else, and I watched as he came back. I didn't see him come back into the house. As suddenly as he was outside, he was beside me, inside. He smiled at me as if he hadn't seen me in many years. But for the first time, that familiar smile didn't reach his eyes. Story 2. My wife has only gotten prettier since she was attacked. 3 of the worst days of my life have happened within the past year. Each one involved my amazing wife being hurt. Hopefully this is a space where I can share what happened and potentially find some empathy for our unique situation. I'll start at the beginning for some much needed context. One of my clearest and happiest memories is the day I first met my wife. I remember it was overcast and chilly outside, with a delightful scent of rain in the air. I was new to Seattle at the time, and as a result didn't have any friends. So I decided to head over to a nearby mall and see what there was to do. After spending most of the day browsing through various stores and wondering about how I was going to manage city life, I decided to grab an ice cream cone. Yes, I know, ice cream on a cold day is weird, but it was pineapple flavored ice cream, which is my absolute favorite. Funnily enough, my wife's favorite fruit is pineapple. What can I say? I'm a very lucky guy. Anyways, there I was eating my ice cream watching people walk by when I noticed her inside of a store across from me. I'm sure everyone has had that moment before. When they see someone so beautiful, they get all flustered and shy and start getting angry at themselves for not wearing their best outfit on that particular day. I was wearing this stupid t-shirt that had a cat doing kung fu on it and my favorite pair of khakis. Yeah, that's what I was wearing when I met my wife. I still shudder to think about it. She, on the other hand, God. It still makes me get all hot beneath the collar to remember what she was wearing. She wore the hell out of those tiny denim shorts. I couldn't rip my eyes away from those long, white legs even if I tried. And that rolled up flannel? Please. It was a wrap. No wonder so many men surrounded her. But what pissed me off was how many of them were clearly there with their females. I got jealous pretty quick. And when I saw one of those pigs reach over and try to smack her on the ass, it took everything I had to not kill him. But I held back because I felt like she wouldn't be the kind of woman that would tolerate a guy with aggressive tendencies. So I waited like a gentleman. And when I saw her notice me and give that little crooked smile, I knew it was permission for me to go over and introduce myself. We instantly hit it off. I cracked a few jokes which she smiled at in a way women tended not to, which gave me the confidence to open up a bit prematurely and talk about politics. I think that's what sealed things between us, because it turned out she shared the same beliefs. Up to that point, I didn't really believe in such a thing as a soulmate, but after talking to her, as easily as I talked to myself, I became a true believer. When things flow, they flow, and you don't question it, you know? Things progressed really fast after that. I took her home that same night, and we made love. We were so taken in with one another that we spent the entire next day together, and the next day, and the next until I suggested she just stay. The very next week, we were married. It was amazing, whereas before I spent most of my time alone in the apartment. My only real social interaction being at work, or with whoever was delivering my food that day. I now was traveling around Washington going on hikes, or eating at new restaurants, or staying in and watching movies with my beloved. On the second weekend of the following month, the first worst day occurred. I brought my wife to my hometown, in order to meet my parents. We were both feeling pretty anxious about it, but I promised my wife that they were good people, and despite being more on the conservative side, they did have some Hispanic friends. So I could count on them being open to new kinds of relationships. They never even let my wife step through the door. I was horrified. Then my dad insulted my wife, and I nearly strangled him to death. Thankfully, my wife is a pacifist and was able to calm me down. Otherwise, my dad may have lost his life that day, and I would have gone to jail. Since then, I have not spoken to either of them, and that hurts. The second worst day happened at my job's Halloween party. At first, everyone treated my wife pretty well, and they complimented her pirate costume. I was so relieved to see that. Then while I was using the restroom, my drunk-ass manager tried to pull off her top. My wife was so scared she wasn't able to cry out for help. But she shouldn't have had to in the first place, because practically the entire office was watching. When I walked back in, I saw them laughing while my manager dishonored her. I wasted no time in tackling him to the floor and elbowing him in the face. That got me fired, but it was worth it. I love my wife, and I would fight a fucking bear for her. The final worst day happened last month. We were both feeling pretty down in the dumps, so we decided to catch a movie and then grab some pineapple ice cream afterwards. I blame myself for what happened next. We were walking through a park enjoying our ice cream when I noticed we were being followed. There were 3 guys, all in their early 20s, and they had the worst grins on their faces. They started whistling and calling out to us both, and I felt so much regret for allowing her to step out in that lace camisole. They began chasing us not long after. She was in heels, and I'm not athletic, so they quickly got their hands on us. I was forced to watch as they ripped the hair off her head, stole her clothes, and broke those beautiful legs of hers in half. I screamed so much I lost my voice and coughed up blood. Yet no one wanted to help. They took one look at the damage done to my wife, and must have judged she had no chance of survival. But my wife is tough. She gave me the strength to stand up and run her back to the apartment. While she regained her strength, I promised her that I would do whatever it took to get her feeling pretty again. She told me that the first thing she wanted was hair. I looked at her shiny bald head and nodded in agreement. I asked her what kind, and she said her favorite was Indian hair. Not Indian as in from India, Indian as in Native American. So I got it for her. She looked amazing with those long, dark tresses, even better than before. Next, she asked for bigger lips. That was harder to get, but after using the last of my money, I was able to have a custom pair made for her. It might be TMI, but I found some pretty good uses for those things. She continued to request more and more modifications to her body, and at that point, due to my lack of funds, I had to resort to stealing. But little by little, I realized I was building the perfect woman. Every day, she got prettier. Finally, she said she wanted her legs back. At that point, I started crying and said there was no way. I didn't know who those men were or where they had taken her legs. She understood that, but said there was a different way she could walk again. I followed her directions and brought the goat's legs on the following full moon. Then came last night. We were both laying in bed staring at one another like usual. Then the most amazing thing happened. She blinked. "Sakura?" I said. I sat up and rested my hand on her cold plastic cheek. She turned and sat up on the bed, using her new pair of legs. Her movements were very precise and calculated as she tested things out. I was shocked at how heavy her footsteps were. It sounded like one of those Clydesdales was walking in our bedroom. She stopped right next to me and held out her hand. "I need skin." Story 3. There were 2 identical flights to New York. I don't think the one I got on was real. Airports make my skin crawl. Not anything about the building itself, but everything that comes with it. The constant squeaking of shoes against newly polished tile. The sound of crying babies, and the murmured apologies of their parents. And the smell? 2. The airport in general was a mess of various scents. Some pleasant, like freshly baked pretzels, and some not so pleasant, like the stench of body odor. It was a sensory nightmare, and I avoided it whenever I could. I was content with living the rest of my life in my little town, in the same country. However, fate had other plans. One of my friends, Julian, told my mom he was heading across the country for school. She saw it as the perfect opportunity to get me out of the house. I applied, thinking my grades were too low to matter. But since God hates me, I got in. The plan was set. Julian would have already arrived at New York before I even left, meaning he would pick me up the moment my flight landed. Before I knew it, the day arrived and Mom was dropping me off at the airport. "It's time to grow up, Marin," Mom said, placing a hand on my shoulder. After one final hug and goodbye, she left, leaving me utterly alone, gazing up at the sterile edifice towering over me. Before I entered, the smell of sanitation spray and coffee wafted through the automatic doors. I checked my watch. 3:30 a.m. With a sigh, I entered the airport, my suitcase rolling behind me. I weaved through families, businessmen, and employees alike until I finally reached a respite, a large screen with some dated software, displaying flight times. Scanning the list, I found mine, Gate 5, 5 a.m., New York. I was granted a short amount of relief that was instantly dashed when I saw the flight below mine. Everything matched. Same gate, same flight, same time. Except for one thing. NWE York. I frowned, squinting in the dim light. That couldn't be right. I knew the airport was old, but surely they wouldn't miss such an obvious mistake, right? It was something so trivial, but it bothered me to no end. I hobbled over to a worker and alerted her of the error. She just blinked twice before snorting. "First time?" she asked, and I nodded sheepishly. "Yeah, I thought so. Don't worry, I'm sure it's just a glitch. Nothing for you to worry about." Her tone was nonchalant, and I felt myself relax just a little bit. She was right. What was I worrying for? The technology looked like it was made in the 90s, and the airport was built in the 50s, and I was worried about a simple misspell? It was just the nerves talking. And yet, despite repeating the mantra in my head countless times, I couldn't get rid of the feeling of dread looming over me. I sat at the terminal for around 20 minutes, just watching people around me and thinking about nothing. Eventually, the PA system came on and the automated voice announced my flight's boarding time. Now boarding Group A for Flight 5B to JFK International, departing from Gate 5. I looked up and saw a large gathering of people at a gate nearby. The crowd moved as one, shuffling forward like a line of ants. I grabbed my bag, took a deep breath, and walked into the mob. There was a woman who was taking the tickets. She wore the traditional uniform for most workers at the airport and wore a stoic expression. "Ticket?" she said, holding out a hand. I handed her mine, and she checked it, her eyebrows furrowed for a moment. My heart stopped. Were there problems with my ticket? Was she going to ask me to step aside? She checked the screen again, then at me, before nodding once and stamping my ticket. I breathed a sigh of relief. The line progressed slowly until finally I was on the plane. It was not what I was expecting. I've heard many stories from my friends about airplanes being noisy, with people chatting away, or the sound of children playing with toys. It was dead silent. Not in a peaceful way, though. It was a foreboding silence, like the kind you expect from a funeral home. I was sat beside an older woman who, from what I could tell by my peripheral vision, was staring directly at the back of the seat in front of her. I know this doesn't sound weird, but when I say staring ahead, I mean she didn't move at all, not even a blink, the entire time. And it wasn't just her, it was everyone on the plane, too. I couldn't see much, because the seats were in the way, but I could tell that they were all just sitting there, not moving a muscle, out of fear of drawing attention. I sat just as stiffly, my shoulders hunched. My other neighbor, a businessman, settled into his seat with a sigh. He took out his laptop and opened it, the screen lighting up the area around us in an unnatural glow. Now, being able to compare what a normal person looked like on the plane to everyone else, the oddities of the others were even more apparent. As I redirected my attention back to my surroundings, my heart stopped. The older woman was now glaring at the businessman. Her gaze was intense, as if she were trying to burn holes in the side of his head. The passengers in front had also turned around and were watching him work. My breath quickened as I glanced around the cabin. Everyone was doing the same thing, watching this man type away on his laptop, who was completely oblivious to the attention he was getting. When he lifted his head to stretch and saw the dozens of eyes staring at him, his face paled. He didn't say anything, but I could see the panic in his eyes. He shifted in his chair, head darting from one passenger to another, before finally settling on me. I could see the question in his gaze, the silent plea for help, but I had no answers. I didn't know the rules, but at that moment I knew he had broken one. I just shrank in my seat, clamping my eyes shut. I didn't dare open them again, not even when the man's typing had stopped. All I could hear was the soft hum of the engine, nothing that indicated there was anything living or breathing on this plane. When I did open my eyes, the seat to my left was empty, not even an indent of where he sat. Now, I wasn't really the superstitious type, nor was I the type to believe in the supernatural or paranormal. But I also couldn't deny what had just happened before my eyes. Whatever the explanation was, something was seriously wrong. My mind was racing with questions, but I couldn't focus on any of them. All I could do was try to keep calm and remain still, careful not to let my breath get too loud or uneven, as it seemed like the smallest disturbance could draw unwanted attention to myself. Suddenly, the screens that were embedded into each seat turned on, and I just barely managed to fight off the urge to gasp. However, I did flinch, prompting my neighbor to turn her head ever so slightly towards me. I froze, stared straight forward, and waited until she had returned her gaze back to the screen. Once she had done so, I let out the breath I was holding in. A safety video started playing, which was strange since we had already taken off. But this was far from the strangest thing about the plane, so I didn't question it. It was a rather standard video, the type that you would see on any other commercial airline, with great animated characters showing how to fasten the seatbelt. I followed along with the animation and strapped myself in. Click, all at once. However, many people that were on this plane also strapped themselves in with a unified click. I was off by a few milliseconds, but either those things didn't notice or were too distracted by the few stragglers who were off by several seconds. Others like me and the businessman, I assumed. Once again, the attention of the old woman and, assumedly, all the other passengers was focused on the latecomers. I didn't need to see to know that they too disappeared without a trace. Just like the man next to me, the video continued, and text appeared on the screen. I couldn't even read it on account of how many letters were mixed up. It was like a keyboard mash, and I couldn't make out a single word. But somehow, I still got the general message. Follow the instructions or face the consequences. At that point, I was pretty sure the consequences were death. So, for the rest of the video, I followed along with whatever instructed, making sure I did everything exactly right, down to the second, but it just kept going. Odd request after odd request with no rhyme or reason. Press the call button 3 times. Hold your breath for 10 seconds. Close your eyes for 5. The list just went on. One by one, the remaining humans on the plane were picked off. A man coughed during the 10-second holding session. He was gone. Another person forgot to put their phones on silent. They were gone. A baby started wailing in the back, while the mother tried desperately to calm it. I shut my eyes and willed the tears forming in them to stay, the lump in my throat to go down, and my heart to stop its rapid thumping. No rhythm that might set me apart. The crying ceased instantly. They were gone. Soon, I was the only human left on the plane. I like to think that maybe someone else was as good as me at following instructions, and maybe they made it through unscathed, but I had no way of knowing. After around an hour, the video finally ended, leaving me with nothing but the faint droning of the plane's engine. For hours, I was slick with sweat and my heart hammered, at a pace a hair's breadth away from bursting. My lungs ached, desperate for a deep breath, and my muscles burned from tensing up, but I dared not move. The plane was just supposed to travel across the country, maybe an hour or 2, but the flight had long passed that. Fear subsided, replaced with a numbing, all-consuming sense of monotony. The boredom was unbearable. So I tried to distract myself by counting the number of breaths I took or how many times the lights above my head flickered. It was the only way to keep me sane. That boredom gave way to exhaustion, gradually wearing down my body until I felt like I could barely keep myself upright. My eyelids became heavy, and it became harder to focus on anything around me. I couldn't even tell if I was still in the same plane or not. Everything was starting to blur together. I concluded that if I were to die, then having it happen in my sleep wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. So, with that thought in mind, I let my eyes close and cast myself into the void of unconsciousness. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to thank you for choosing Dash Static as your preferred airline. We hope that you choose to fly with us again. Local time is 9 p.m. and the temperature is a nice 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Please enjoy your visit to NW York. I was jolted awake by a voice crackling through the speakers, announcing our arrival to New York. I had finally arrived. I forced the memories of the trip out of my hand, forced myself to ignore the empty seats around me and the blank stares of the passengers, and walked out of the plane, rolling my luggage behind me. My heart nearly leaped out of my chest when I saw Julian's form standing in the lobby, holding a sign. I was nearly about to sprint towards him and give him the biggest hug of his life when I noticed something off about him. That big, dopey smile was gone. His face was a blank page, and his eyes didn't spark with life, even as they met mine. And the sign he was holding read, "Welcome to NW York, Marin." Story 4. Truffle Pig. I can't eat. That's the gist of it. I can't eat. I guess to people who haven't grown up the way I have. It sounds absurd. So much of our lives revolve around eating. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. It's a social ritual and contract, and without it we lose a core pillar of being human. But I can't eat. I can't be part of that. It's complicated. I grew up to a single mother with a minimum wage. How she managed to keep a sickly kid alive through all that is beyond me. And I don't mean sickly as in getting nasty colds or ear infections. I mean sick with a big S. For as long as I can remember, I could never eat solid food. Some doctors called it inoperable achalasia, but my mom called it royal throat. Just like the kings and queens of old, she used to say. They were so used to having servants feed them that they stopped eating for themselves. It was just a nice way for her to make it sound like I was special rather than cursed. The main problem is that I can't swallow. So instead I'd have to puree my food and slide it down my throat with a thick plastic tube. I can't really taste anything, and the whole ordeal can look uncomfortable to onlookers. So it's something I'm very private about. I can still taste and chew things. But a pleasant taste don't really outweigh the threat of choking to death. I can drink, but it takes some effort. If it gets too hot or cold, my throat just shuts down. Same if it's too sugary, too spicy, or too sweet. And since I can't swallow, I just tilt my head back and let it run down my throat. Mild apple juice is an occasional treat. But I like to stick to ordinary tap water. No fizzy stuff. Nothing that makes the muscles contract. Apart from that one thing, I was a normal kid. I still went trick-or-treating, and by the end of the night, I gave all my candy away to my friends. It made me bully-proof, in a way. To them, I was weird, but it was the kind of weirdness that paid off. Whenever someone handed out candy or fruit or freebies, I passed mine along to those who treated me well. You're like a truffle pig, my buddy Dawson used to say. You get to sniff out all the good stuff, but you can't have any yourself. And that's where the nickname started. Truffle Pig. I don't know if it's some kind of myth or urban legend, but it said that truffle pigs can never be allowed to eat the truffles they're trained to find. If they do, they're useless. They get so preoccupied with finding truffles for themselves that there's nothing left. They get a taste for it, and it's all over. I got the occasional jab and mean look about the nickname, but most of them said it with love. It wasn't mean-spirited. It went from truffle pig to truffles to ruffles to just rough or ruffy. And I guess that name stuck around ever since. I graduated from high school and got a job on a clam boat. Not a fancy job, but I've always loved the sea. I never get seasick or car sick or anything like that. maybe a side effect from having a strange stomach. So when a spot opened, I was first in line. Did for a summer as a practice run, and got hired full-time a month later. Great pay, decent benefits. We usually worked on smaller vessels, inshore boats, smaller yields that could turn a surprising profit at the local seafood markets. Whatever we could get our hands on, we could sell at a huge markup. There wasn't a single Christmas where I didn't go home with a bonus. I'd end up being the designated driver. Whenever I went out with the guys, they'd sometimes forget about my deal and bring me a beer or a scotch, and they'd end up getting an extra one. I'd stare at that bowl of spicy peanuts in the middle of the table and wonder what it'd be like to pig out on them. Stuff my face full and go to town. To feel the crunch in my teeth resonating in my jaw. But that'd send me straight to the hospital or the morgue, a yellow building just down the street. Truffle pig, look but don't taste. Mom passed when I was 27. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was a result of a lengthy battle coming to an end. I held a speech at her wake, divided her possessions among her living relatives, packed all her things in brand new cardboard from the tool shop, picking apart a careful knick-knack ecosystem where everything has a place, leaving only pale walls and dust bunnies. It was kind of funny, though. There was this one picture of her and I from when I was just an infant. Back then, I had brown eyes and hair. I thought it was someone else at first, seeing as how I now have my mother's blonde hair with green eyes. But there was a note on the back confirming that it was, in fact, our first picture together. I was off for a few days off work to get my affairs in order, but I declined. Stepping away from your routine underlines how painful the change is. By declining it, you're robbing it of its power. That's what I thought, at least. But when it rains, it pours. And maybe I was distracted that one morning in early May when I turned onto the interstate. I'd gone down that road 1,000 times, but just this once, I didn't pay attention. Maybe the other driver didn't either. Either way, the collision was violent. No one died, at least they had to cut me out, but the other guy walked away without a scratch. They put me in a neck brace and took me to a hospital, ran all kinds of tests. I had a fracture in my left leg, but apart from that, it just looked bad. Most of it was surface level stuff. They still did their due diligence though. X-rays, checkups, the whole shebang. I had to wear a cast on my leg. But apart from that, I'd be fine. I remember the final day before they sent me home. The doctor, a middle-aged Indian woman, went through my x-rays and talked at length about how lucky I'd been. In between instructions on how to keep my cast clean, I threw in a question. What about my neck? I asked, am I going to have to change how I eat? No, that should be fine, she said. Why do you ask? The achalasia, I said, it's inoperable, should be in my file. Achalasia? She looked at me for a couple of seconds, then back up at the x-ray. You don't have achalasia. I went over it with her again and again. I told her I'd been diagnosed as an infant, that it had stuck with me all my life, that my throat was atrophied, and that I could only have pureed food pushed down my throat with a tube, royal throat, like the kings and queens of old. I know what you're referring to, she said, but I don't know what to tell you. You don't have it. From what I can see, you've never had it. She pointed at the x-rays and explained how to recognize it, and that there were no signs of it in any way. I was perfectly fine, I just had to practice eating. If you've been doing this for so long, chances are you'll never get quite used to it, she admitted. But physically, there's nothing wrong, but it's going to take time adjusting to. I walked out there on crutches, but I barely even paid attention to the leg. I couldn't believe it. All this time, I could have been just like all the others. Someone must have misdiagnosed me. But there was nothing in my file suggesting there had even been a conversation about achalasia in my past. In those files, I was perfectly healthy. Always had been. I couldn't make sense of it. There had to be a reason I'd lived the way I had. I decided I would go through my mother's things to see if there was a hint. I had boxes to go through a second time. Maybe I'd miss something. I got a ride home from the hospital by my buddy Stevie. 40-something father 3, salt of the earth kind of guy. The kind of person who is a pickup and doesn't mind helping you move. 'Cause that's just what you're supposed to do. He must have noticed I was a bit quieter than usual. "Don't worry about work, Ruffy," he said. "Give it a couple weeks." "Thanks, but that ain't it," I said. "It's my throat." "Whiplash?" he asked. "Got an ache or something?" I explained to him what the doctor had said, that I was fine and always had been. I told him about the x-rays, how nothing showed, and how there was nothing in my files. Stevie got so caught up in the story that he almost missed a green light, making the guy behind us lean on the horn. Stevie snapped out of it and stepped on the gas. "That's fucked up," he said, making a left turn. "But, I mean, that's good news, too. I suppose, yeah." I was going to have to get used to a new way of living, one where I could sit by the table and share a meal. I had a hard time wrapping my head around it. I was a bit scared. After all, what if I didn't like it? Could I just go back pretending? But first, I had to give it a try. I couldn't just go trudging into a restaurant and order a ribeye. I had to try something small. I had Stevie drop me off at the supermarket. I bought some yogurt, cucumber, and chocolate ice cream. I asked him to join me in the kitchen. I figured it'd be for the best to have someone call for help if things went sideways. Like the doctor had said, even if I was physically okay, it'd take time getting used to the sensation. There aren't exactly any tutorials on how to eat. It's supposed to come naturally to us. It's not something you learn. We sat down at my kitchen table, and I cracked open the yogurt. Stevie had a Coke. I didn't have any cutlery, so I had to grab a teaspoon from my mom's kitchen box. I dipped in the yogurt, picked it up, and observed. My heart was beating out of my chest. "You all right?" Stevie asked, nervous. "Just try a little," he smiled. "Try to enjoy it." So I tried it. I let my tongue soak in the soft vanilla and acidic tang. I took a deep breath, leaned back, and just tried. I almost choked as my throat muscles cramped up, but it went well enough. It was wildly uncomfortable, though. I coughed a little, but held up a hand to show Stevie I was okay. I tried a little more, and then some ice cream. It was difficult, and I could feel an ache in my throat. I was flexing muscles I'd hardly ever used. Over a painstakingly slow hour, I tried little bits and pieces of things. I was getting used to it, slowly but surely. I had to stop when I got to the cucumber, though. I cut it up and tried eating it like a mush, but part of the skin got stuck in the back of my throat. I ended up having a coughing fit. Stevie had to give me a couple back slaps. We decided to pause for the day, but it was promising. I was feeling something I hadn't felt before. It was a new experience, and I was getting better at it. "Give it a month," said Stevie. "By the time that leg cast is off, you'll be a brand new person." Over the next few days, I was stuck at home, waiting for my leg to heal. Meanwhile, I took some time going through my mom's stuff. Everything from old phone books to photo albums. There were a lot of baby pictures, but they weren't in a particular order. In most of them, I had blonde hair and green eyes, but there were a couple where it was still a clear brown. I could see a couple of things change in my mom, too. Her hair getting longer, the marks under her eyes growing deeper. But there were other things, too. There was this one picture where she was breastfeeding me, and another shortly after where she used a bottle. There was also one where she'd been in some sort of accident, wearing a bandage that reached up to her shoulder. All the while, I was microdosing on food. Little pieces of ice cream and yogurt, mashed potatoes and gravy, a strawberry sorbet. It took some time to get my throat moving, but after just a couple of days, I could swallow with little to no problem. The first solid food I ate was a salty peanut. I bit down and chewed it for so long that my jaw ached, and when I finally swallowed, I could feel a tingle in my neck, like little puzzle pieces falling into place. I was so relieved I could cry. I ended up eating a whole bag, letting a rerun of Friends echo in the background, but all I could hear was the sweet crunch of peanuts breaking against my perfect enamel. It was such a filling sensation. Flavor, texture, mouthfeel, and with it all, the realization that I had so much more to experience. It was euphoric. I want to say the first time I had a big dinner for a special occasion with my work friends. Not just Stevie, but the whole crew. My cast was still healing, so I had some issue getting around, but that wasn't going to stop me from having a fantastic night. A proper steak dinner, a shrimp cocktail, garlic bread, I didn't hold back. I think my colleagues could feel the change in the air, as they all got equally excited to order. We had some drinks, made some jokes, and left all the pretense at the door. Just guys being guys. As soon as I dug into my shrimp cocktail, I could feel something. There was this rush of energy, like an electric surge. I could feel my pupils growing larger, and I couldn't close my eyes. My breathing grew shallow, and my pulse wouldn't stop rising. It's like I was on some kind of drug or fighting for my life. I thought I might be having an allergic reaction, so I had to stop myself and do a mental check. I felt fine. I was fine. Great, actually. The moment my steak arrived, the others raised a glass. To good food, Stevie said, and good friends. The others echoed the sentiment. But before they got to good friends, I'd sunk my teeth into the steak. I could feel the juices soaking into my teeth. It's difficult to describe the sensation. It's like I didn't just eat a steak. I could hear the bovine death cry in the back of my head. I could feel myself growling as a predator, sinking my teeth in like a prowling tiger. I daydreamed with open eyes, watching the red of the meat pulse with an invisible heartbeat. And somewhere in the distance, I could hear Stevie say something, but I couldn't make out the words. I bit down hard and tore away. My teeth ached, as if they were pushing themselves out of my mouth, reaching for more meat. And with every passing second, the restaurant faded away, until something cold splashed across my face. I was lying on the floor. My work friends were standing in a circle around me. One of the waiters called an ambulance. My hands were covered in grease. I grabbed the steak right off the plate with my bare hands. There were bite marks on my forearm, deep ones, still bleeding. I had to get my arm stitched up. According to Stevie, I'd gone completely feral. I'd torn that steak up, reached across to Luke's pork chop, and grabbed that too. When I couldn't immediately grab more meat, I'd fallen to the floor, biting my own arm like I was trying to subdue a prey animal. They'd never seen anything like it. Some kind of episode, Stevie said. We're worried about you. Doctors didn't know what to make of it. Some kind of chemical imbalance from a sudden shift in diet, combined with stress and physical recovery. It didn't help that I'd been drinking. Not much, mind you, but enough for it to affect me. They couldn't point to a single instigating factor, and instead prescribed me a kind of anti-anxiety medication. They were just throwing darts at the wall at that point. Coming home, I noticed something peculiar. There was a crack in the side of my cast. I'd just been at the hospital, and it had been fine, so it must have happened recently. I thought about going back there, but I flexed my leg a little, and it felt fine, and in a couple of minutes, the whole cast peeled off. My leg was healed. Now, I'm no doctor, but I couldn't feel anything wrong with it. I could put pressure on it, walk, flex my foot, not even a hint of pain. The only thing I could point out as being unusual was a strange skin growth on the left side of my thigh. At first, I thought it was a long strand of hair, but it was too thick and covered in skin. Touching it didn't hurt. So I just broke it off and held it up. I got a little spot of blood from it, but nothing major. The thing was moving when I held it up, contracting over and over, like a dying insect, or like the leg of a shrimp. I got a call from my boss the following morning. They insisted I took some time off. In accordance with my doctor, they were eager to have me back, but I had clearly not adapted to my new circumstances. It was a very diplomatic way of saying I was making people uncomfortable and that they needed some time before they could forget that mental image of me gnawing on myself like a wild animal. But that just gave me more time to experience things on my own. I made a long list of things I was going to eat. Pork, chicken, turkey, maybe something a bit more unusual like alligator, at least 3 kind of fish, crab, and every kind of fruit I could find at the supermarket. Then again, fruit didn't excite me as much. There was just something about biting into meat that was way more satisfying. I enjoyed the taste of fruit and veggies, but there was something about the texture of meat that I couldn't make sense of. Then again, this was my first time experiencing food. There was no way for me to know this wasn't normal. When I got back from my shopping spree, I went to the bathroom to wash my hands. I noticed something in the bathroom mirror. My eyes looked different. The pupil looked rectangular. I figured it was a trick of the light, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. but I was too excited to care. I was going to have a field day. So I washed my hands, splashed some water on my face, and hurried into the kitchen. At first I was systematic, putting out little samples of things, bite-sized nuggets of meat, ready to be plopped down in a single gulp. I prepped a couple in the frying pan, others in the oven. I bought a new air fryer, try out some combos. I put on some music and had a blast. Everything was so rich, so succulent, different textures, different flavors, and a world to discover. I could imagine the salty sea running between my fingers as I bit down on the crab meat. I could feel the texture of the feathers as I slurped up a slice of turkey. I adored it, every last second of it. I spent close to 13 hours that way, just eating, eating, eating. The shops closed and opened, and I was first in line to get more. I must have looked like hell. That's what the look on the cashier's face said at least. I would fall asleep at the dinner table, still holding my next piece of meat, a chicken wing, a tomahawk steak, an honest-to-God cheeseburger. I close my eyes and keep eating, dozing off between bites. It was heaven. While I didn't know at the time, I kept that up for 49 hours total. I was in this meat-stained daze, not knowing what was happening around me. I'd missed calls and appointments, emails, bills to pay. I hadn't paid attention to any of it, and my systematic approach had completely fallen out the window. It was a marathon. When my kitchen ran empty, I lumbered to the bathroom. My stomach felt like wearing a backpack on the front, like an imbalance. I had to lean my arms against the wall to keep myself from tipping forward. I was scared to look in the bathroom mirror, but I did it anyway. The pupils of my eyes had gone horizontal. The skin of my left leg had hardened into a kind of shell. My teeth had grown long and jagged. My nails curled into claws. And throughout my hair I could find these long hollow tubes, like the growing feathers of a baby bird. My tongue was thick and discolored, my skin turning a reddish brown with white milk-like spots. I just stared at myself, not grasping that this was a mirror. It showed me, but I wasn't me anymore. And when that realization hit, two thoughts struck me at once. One, that I was destroying myself, that this whole ordeal was what my mother had tried to avoid. Two, that I didn't want to stop. I needed to keep going. I went through my mother's things in between meals. It is hard to piece together a life after it's gone, but it's even harder when you think you already know what it looks like. But my mother's life was very different from what I imagined. Sure, my father was a mystery. There was no mention of him anywhere, except that they met at a punk concert back in the 90s, but she lived a very full life since then. She had friends, lovers, and plans of her own. But one thing stood out in particular, how I'd lost my brown hair and eyes. From what I could tell, she'd hurt herself in some way, and after that I'd changed. It was around the time where I'd gone from breastfeeding to being bottle-fed. A thought hit me, an uncomfortable one. I thought back on what I'd done with that steak, and the way I'd torn into it. Could I have done something similar to my mother? Had I always been like this? I tried to find more. More answers, more pictures, more anything. All the while, I ate. When I ran out of meat, I had the fruit. When I ran out of fruit, I had the veggies. Then the butter, the yogurt, the ice cubes in the back of the freezer. At one point, it was 3 a.m, and I was feverishly going through a photo album from my high school years. Nothing interesting, but I realized I didn't have anything left to eat, and yet I was still chewing. Looking down, I had started pulling out the buttons from the remote control and crunched them up like they were little plastic cashews. I didn't care. I just had to eat. I gnawed on anything and everything. The leg of the kitchen table, the copper wire going my bedside lamp. I smashed a wine glass on my cutting board and ground it up into something resembling salt and ate that too. I didn't feel a thing. It was just more texture. Wonderful, filling texture. I was in a daze. And the next time I looked myself in the mirror, I could barely comprehend it. When change happens rapidly and naturally, it is hard to notice. You don't really see it until you slow down long enough to care. If you've been running a marathon, you don't stop halfway through to weigh yourself. You wait until you're done. It was the same for me. I didn't realize the changes until I'd slowed down long enough to reflect on them. I wasn't human anymore. My hands had turned into this amalgamation of hoof and claw. My back was bent over with a fish-like ridge running along my spine. My eyes had 3 different colors, and one of them were coming out of the socket. If I concentrated, I could move it in and out like the eye stalk of a crab. A couple of my teeth had turned to glass and ceramic. I could spot copper cables running under parts of my right bicep. Anything and everything I consumed with gusto had integrated into me, one way or another. I couldn't call for help. My fingerprint didn't register on my phone lock. I couldn't make words in my mouth to speak. I'd turned into a flesh prison. You are what you eat. I'd lose track of time. One day I'd have a tail dragging after me. Another I'd have a wing instead of an arm. My whole body was bubbling, like a boiling cauldron, shifting with every bite, but with nothing left to eat. It was devouring itself, eating the last parts of me that were human. I'd awake in a process that couldn't be stopped, and it would turn on itself instead of letting me starve. There was no one to call for help. I could barely close the blinds to my windows. I spent most of the time in the shower, drinking water straight from a busted pipe. I'd spend hours there, drinking, watching myself mutate. I could even affect it in a way. Another finger, I'd think, and there'd be another finger. But it was getting harder to think, to comprehend, to put thoughts together in a way that made sense. Perhaps more things changed than I realized. After all, the brain is as much an organ as the heart, the throat, and the tongue. I'd lose long periods of time to a hazy blur. I remember snatching a bird off the windowsill and eating it whole, like popping a grape. I'd walk around gnawing on the curtains like they were long strands of spaghetti. But in a way, I knew I was losing myself. Whenever I had a moment of clarity, I could feel my heart sink into that empty pit in my stomach. I'm going away, I'd think. I'm losing myself. So with every fiber of my being, I grabbed a piece of paper, bit my finger, and wrote in blood. Stay human. It's difficult to describe the mind of an animal. A part of you disappears. You don't think about inconvenience or what-ifs. You think about your next meal, where to sleep, and where to get water. You don't care if you knock over a lamp or pull out a cable. It's just noise. I remember watching that paper, knowing it said something, but the symbols didn't mean anything. It turned from words to scribbles. At one point I mistook them for droppings and started to look for mice. Didn't find any. I didn't consider myself lost. I didn't consider anything. And for days I lumbered back and forth, turning my home into a nest. Then, at some point, the symbols made sense. A rare moment of clarity. Stay. Human. I knew it was temporary. A matter of minutes, maybe an hour. I had to think of a plan. Something, anything, that would make me stay human. Everything pointed to me taking on the properties of what I ate. So if I wanted to make myself human, there was only one solution. One grotesque, unthinkable solution. Now I could find something tasteful in everything I ate. Anything from glass to copper to wood and bone. But having to eat human meat to find myself, that was a line too far. But what choice did I have? I made a plan. It was a long shot, but it was the only one I could think of. I could feel myself slipping. So I tried to remember 3 things. The color of the building I had to go to, the direction I had to move, and that there was meat there. Color, direction, meat. I repeated it like a mantra. I remember standing by the front door, pressing my head against the wood. I could hear someone taking their sweet time to lock up and leave in the hallway outside. Please, just go. I prayed. You have to go. By the time they were gone. So it was my mind. All that remained was color, direction, and meat. I made it outside. I followed the direction, looking for the color. A yellow building just down the street. I would run through the dense woods on all fours, thundering like a hoofed gorilla. I could feel my body changing to sustain the momentum, my arms growing heavy. I had to force myself to keep going, to stay focused on the task at hand. There were so many distractions. Cars in the distance, voices, bright lights casting shadows of potential prey. But I followed the direction in my mind, and I saw the building with the color, and I knew there'd be meat. I didn't even notice the locked door. I walked straight through like it was made of paper. There was no guard there. Thankfully, if I'd had the mind to read, I would have noticed the sign of County Morgue. I would know what the smell from the metal boxes meant. But in the mind of an animal, you don't care about the name of your prey. You don't give meaning to your actions. You just take what you want and make it your own. So that's what I did. I'm not going to go into detail. I can't. I remember every bite, but I can't bring myself to put it into words. A man who died from a heart attack. An older woman who'd broken her neck. I pulled them out and did what animals do. Meat, bone, organ. Later, the papers would say it was a bear. They weren't entirely wrong, I suppose. I lumbered home, dragging my bloated stomach through the woods. I'd feel my senses returning to me, a mind becoming human. But with that realization came understanding of what I'd done, and the searing emotional pain that ensued. I lay there among the buried bushes and the blue sunflowers outside my apartment complex, hoping no one would see me as I waited for an opportunity to go home. But honestly, at that moment, I think I rather would have died. So here we are, back at the start. I can't eat. My hair has grown out into a mix of black and gray, a combination of the two people missing from the morgue. My face still looks like my own. I guess that part was still buried somewhere deep in me. I'm a little taller and a little heavier, but my colleagues have chalked that up to a change in diet. I've gone back to an all-puree lifestyle, that same old bottle pushing straight into my gut. I can't allow myself to be lost to sensation again. I treat myself to some fruit every now and then, an occasional drink, but I don't eat full meals. I don't want to tempt fate any more than I already have. I'm back at my job, and I think I'm doing all right. People are looking at me like they always have. No one questions that I've gone back to what works for me. They could see for themselves that something didn't sit quite right when I started eating. They didn't want to see that roughie again, and that's fine with me. Of course I want to know more, but the only person who could tell me for sure has passed on. There are no more leads, no more signs. The only thing I could find was a curiosity among my mom's old letters. I'd missed it once because it was stuck in her collection of birthday cards, but there was a handwritten note from an anonymous sender. I told you not to breastfeed him. No name, no signature, just messy handwriting on a crumpled up piece of yellow paper. All in all, life goes on. I know I'll never really be like everyone else, but I think that's okay. I can pretend for as long as I need to. Maybe it's okay to be a tainted truffle pig as long as I don't go looking for something to eat. But if I'm honest, sometimes I wonder, if I gave in fully and let myself run loose, if I consumed anything and everything, what would that make me? If I put it all into a single package, what would I become? Truffle pig, look but don't taste. Story 5. Someone is using my identity and left me a message. I hope I'm posting this in the right place. I'm usually a rational person, but the last month has rattled me so badly, I just need someone to tell me I'm not going crazy. About a month ago, my bank called to verify what they said was a routine address change. They asked if I'd recently moved to a city in Michigan. I've never lived in Michigan, barely even passed through, so I told them no, and they flagged my account for fraud and sent me a new card. That kind of thing is annoying, but it happens, right? I thought so until a week later, when a plain envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with the words, "Remember what you forgot here," written in block letters. Not even my handwriting, but it was clearly written by hand. I tried to laugh it off, but I kept a note in case it mattered. The timing felt like too much of a coincidence. Then other weird things started happening. My upstairs neighbor, who I barely know, greeted me by name and then asked if my trip to Michigan went okay. When I said I'd never been, He looked confused and apologized. Packages showed up at my door. One with a book about memory disorders, which I didn't order. Another with a t-shirt from my child at elementary school, and then a standard-looking house key taped to an old postcard of downtown in Arbor. None of them had a sender's name, and nothing in my Amazon or mail order history matched up. On Instagram, I started getting DMs from a blank account saying, "You were there too." I reported and blocked it, but took screenshots first, just in case. At this point, paranoia really started setting in. I started keeping a log of everything strange, taking photos of packages and writing down times and dates. I checked my credit reports clean, my social accounts, nothing except the weird DMs, and even talked to a friend in IT about digital identity theft. We couldn't find any trace of a breach, but I started to wonder if this was someone I actually knew. The real breaking point was last weekend. A nurse from a psychiatric hospital in Michigan called my cell, saying I had just discharged myself against medical advice and asked if I needed any follow-up support. They had my full name, date of birth, and even my old emergency contact from college. Information I've never posted anywhere public. I told her she had the wrong person, but honestly, her tone made me feel like I was the one confused. Since then, I filed a police report, told my landlord, changed every password, and started locking my important documents away. I'm sleeping with the lights on and triple-checking the door before bed. I don't feel safe in my own apartment, constantly wondering what I missed or what's coming next. Tonight, a card was slipped under my door. It just said, "I'm sorry for what I did." Same unfamiliar handwriting. I'm scared. I'm not sure if someone is trying to terrify me, gaslight me, or pull me into some kind of scam, or there's something about my past I somehow don't remember. But I know someone has specific information about me, and I have no idea what their end game is. Has anyone here ever had something like this happen? How do you protect yourself from someone trying to take over your entire life? Story 6. Something is wrong with my wife. It started small. I'd turn off the TV and see my wife standing at the edge of the hallway, half in shadow. No phone, no water, no reason to be there. She wasn't doing anything, just standing, watching. I asked if she needed something. She didn't answer, just turned around and walked away. I figured she couldn't sleep, but it kept happening. I'd find her in different places, always in the dark, standing in the bathroom doorway, crouched behind the kitchen counter, pressed into the corner of the guest room closet. She never said anything, never moved until I acknowledged her. Then she'd calmly walk away like nothing happened. One night, I caught her staring into the turned-off television for nearly an hour, unmoving, barely blinking. I asked what she was doing. She just said, "I'm listening." I set up cameras. One in the hallway, one in the living room, one in the bedroom. First 2 nights, nothing. Third night, at 2:14 a.m., she stepped into the bedroom frame and stood at the foot of the bed, completely still. She didn't blink for 12 full minutes. Her mouth was slightly open. Then she left. I showed her the footage the next day. She stared at the screen in silence, then said, "I don't remember that." She didn't ask me to delete it. She just went into the bathroom and locked the door. Things escalated. I found blood on the hallway light switch, smears on the inside of the closet door, a towel soaked and folded under the sink. She claimed it wasn't hers. That was all she said. I woke up once to find her on the floor next to bed, lying flat on her back, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Another night, she was under the kitchen table with cotton stuffed in her mouth. Her hand was shaking, but she didn't speak. When I tried to touch her, she flinched and backed in the corner like I was someone else. She started recording me. I didn't realize until I noticed a blinking red light behind the mirror. There were cameras in the vents, one inside a cereal box, another behind the toilet. Aimed at the door, I confronted her. She didn't deny it. She said, You weren't looking. Someone has to. I left for 3 days. When I came back, every mirror in the house was gone. Not covered, smashed, pulled off the walls. I found dirt on the floor like someone had been walking barefoot in circles. The hallway walls were scratched, not with words but with long, jagged gouges. The kind people make when they panic and can't speak. That night, I woke up to her straddling my chest, not moving, just staring down at me. Her eyes were unfocused. Her face was pale. There was dry blood on her jaw. I couldn't tell if it was hers or mine. Her hands hovered above my throat, but never touched me. Then she leaned in, like she was trying to hear something inside my body. In the smallest voice, she whispered, "You have to keep watching me. If you look away, I forget how to stop." I blinked. She was gone. The back door was open. The driveway was empty, and there was a hammer sitting next to the front door. It was still warm, still wet. She hasn't come back. Now I wake up to sounds that aren't there. Soft footsteps on carpet. A breath outside the bedroom door. Clicks in the hallway, like someone testing the lock over and over. Last night, I opened my phone and found 39 new videos I never took. They were all of me eating, sleeping, brushing my teeth, all from behind. Always from just far enough away that I never noticed. In the final video, I'm standing in the living room, looking down at something on the floor. The camera tilts, and I see her body. Her face is split open, her arms bent backward, her mouth smiling. She's mouthing something over and over. I slowed it down frame by frame. The words are clear. You blinked. Story 7. There was a spider living by my window. I first noticed it about 7 months ago. There's a small window above my kitchen sink, overlooking my backyard. My morning routine always includes washing my coffee mug and watching the birds chirp the morning into being, as a coffee machine produces a fresh pot. But that morning was different. As I watched the birds flapping around aimlessly, something caught my attention through my peripheral vision. Something on my side of the windowsill. It was a tiny, not much bigger than a fly, squirming around a cloud of white silk. I initially thought it was a gnat. My small windowsill plant and its corresponding humidity often attracts small critters. I neared my nose to the white cloud and saw 8 tiny legs flailing around, adding to the misty web. Every morning in the following weeks and months included checking in on my new spider buddy as I washed my mug and waited for my coffee. I'm not sure why I think of it as a he, usually floated on his cloud of a web, not moving. Occasionally, I would offer a small stimulating puff of air to see if he was still alive. He always was. The days and weeks passed. The December chill was traded for the warm and humid May mornings, and my little friend continued to float around on his web. I'm not a fan of spiders or anything that crawls on more than 4 legs, but as time passed, I grew to think of him as a friend. I don't know why. There was no logic to it. I simply enjoyed seeing him every morning, getting bigger, growing as the year rolled on. Within the first few weeks, Mr. Spider grew from gnat size to around the size of a pea. His body was very round, but his legs were growing faster than his body. That's not unusual, I think. His size capped off with his body being about the size of marble, but his long legs made him a bit intimidating. His size made me a bit uncomfortable, but I told myself I was being dramatic. I know it sounds stupid, but I thought of him as a friend. One morning, I noticed he wasn't on his web. He was on the windowsill, his body drooping down with his legs making sharp upside-down V's. I nudged him with a dead leaf that lay beside him, and he crawled slowly away. He looked lethargic. I figured maybe he was nearing the end of his life. I don't have the first idea how long spiders live, but it occurred to me that maybe he was hungry. I went outside, directly in front of the windowsill, scooped up a few ants and placed them on his web. In an instant, he climbed back up his web towards his prey. I left him to it, So far, it's all fine and dandy, but here is where things get weird. I made this part of my daily routine. I would go outside and pick up a few ants for him to eat. I set out sticky fly traps and began feeding him flies and other small critters that were unfortunate enough to stick to their death. And the spider began to grow, and grow, and grow, and it didn't stop growing. It made me slightly uncomfortable, but I know how big tarantulas can get, and he wasn't there yet, so I kept feeding him. He usually slept in the mornings, curled up in a tight ball, tucking in his legs at the corner of his web. I would place his food on his web and would go on about my day. I didn't see him move for a long time, but seeing that the food was always gone in the morning, he was eating a lot. Then suddenly he was gone. He no longer was on the windowsill for months, and I assumed he was living in the neighboring plant, though deep down I knew he was much too big for that. Maybe he had moved on the larger plants in my living room. I thought. It wasn't until 3 days ago that I began to panic. I entered my kitchen like I had every single morning since I first saw him, and noticed something in the corner of my eye. Along the edge of the room, near the door to my backyard, I saw a small melon-sized sphere, curled up in a familiar pose. I instantly knew what it was, but my brain couldn't digest it. It couldn't be. It must have known I was looking at it. I could no longer think of it as a he, because it slowly uncoiled its enormous legs and began walking across my kitchen. Each leg was over a foot long, folded perfectly for quick movement and stability. Its eyes were bulging and visible for the first time. Its movement startled me, that's an understatement, causing me to recoil back and knock down a cup. In return, my quick movement and clashing noise frightened him. In less than 3 seconds, it jumped 4 feet high onto my wall, climbed directly up, and went inside my AC vent, squeezing tightly to get through. That evening, a dead mouse appeared at the foot of my bed. It was wrapped in a small silky pouch. Last night, another gift appeared. Something bigger and furrier. I think it's a dead squirrel. I don't know, and I don't care. I'm now unsure how to proceed. It lives in my air-conditioned vents/ducts. At night, I hear it crawling outside my bedroom, each leg causing a small tapping sound on my hardwood floor. Throughout the day, I feel like I am constantly being watched. Clearly it thinks of me as a friend. But what happens when that changes? What happens when it develops an appetite for something bigger and it approaches me while I sleep? A weird and stupid side of me has grown fond of it, almost considering it like a roommate. But on the other hand, clearly this is a mutated animal. Spiders don't grow that size, and if push comes to shove, I do not want him around if things go south. Is it venomous? Does that even matter, seeing that it can probably kill me without much effort? It's too quick for me to catch, and even if I try, I don't want to anger it. What should I do? Story 8. My underwater cave diving instructor went down the wrong tunnel. I tried to save him. In the underwater cave system known as the Wakulian Sinks, there is something called a squeeze. It is a 2-foot by 2-foot underwater tunnel filled with sharp rocks and a strong current. It is of an unknown length and leads to an unknown destination. Only 3 people know about its existence. I saw it for the first time on a video made by my cave diving instructor, Dave. Cave diving, for those who don't know, means strapping on scuba gear and go where no God-fearing person would ever go. The flooded depths of the earth. Imagine all the intensity of caving, all the beautiful sights, and all the tight spaces where getting stuck might mean breaking your collarbone to get out. Now do it underwater, strap the bulky air tanks, and half blind from all the silt you're stirring up just by breathing. That's cave diving. When I saw the video, I didn't recognize the squeeze at first. My instructor had to rewind the footage. He paused it, then pointed. There. I squinted. It looked like a shadow under a pile of rocks. It's bigger than it looks, Dave promised. We aren't sure how far back it goes. He explained we would be going past the squeeze on our way into our scheduled dive. It was right next to another gap that led to the exit. Both looked almost exactly the same. If we weren't careful, we could mistake one for the other and risk getting stuck. Have to be aware of every eventuality. My instructor looked at me seriously. One mistake too many. He snapped his fingers. Dunzo. Sayonara. Goodbye. Dead. We moved on with the lesson, but sometimes when I was supposed to be reading a safety manual or memorizing our route through cave, I saw him staring at the still from the video. The look in his eye, it was almost longing. Dave was a weird dude, but to be honest, we all were. We liked risking our lives. For fun, the next day, we set off on our dive. My instructor had a special spot for cave diving. He was a purist, and complained that the popular local diving spots had become overcrowded. The sport was gaining notoriety, and now it seemed like everyone wanted to try it. The best places usually had 4 or 5 dives scheduled a week, and it was impossible to schedule a time without booking it 2 months in advance. But Dave had a private cave only he and a few close friends knew about. It was about an hour out of civilization, in a thick grove of oak trees, on some old farmer's property near Tallahassee. Just to get to the cave, we had to climb all our gear down into another cave, the entrance being a tight fit between 2 large boulders. After about 15 minutes of walking, we reached our destination at the bottom, a black pool. I remember flashing my light over the surface. It made my stomach jump a little. Rather than reflecting the beam, the dark liquid seemed to suck in illumination. We got out our gear and got to work. I had done 1 or 2 practice dives in swimming pools with Dave, but this was my first cave dive. Dave had assured me that we weren't going to do anything crazy. This was routine stuff. Even though there were sections of cave that were a bit of a tight fit, it eventually expanded out into a large bell shape that we could explore at the bottom. It didn't even break 30 meters in depth. He was confident we would be fine. He mapped out this cave himself, knew it like the back of his hand. Once our gear was on, we entered the pool. Our dive lights were bright, but still the water had a strange opacity to it. Dave had warned me it might. There was a lot of silt in this cave. Decayed cave rocks dissolved by the years and liquid surrounding them. But we hadn't stirred up much yet. I could still see the guideline that would lead us in and out. So I was able to calm myself down. It's important to be composed when you cave dive. Panic can kill you if you're not careful. At shallower depths, it multiplies the mistakes you make. In deeper situations, it can increase your heart rate, increasing your breath rate, giving you something called nitrogen narcosis. At first, you feel like you're drunk. Eventually, you pass out. You pass out underwater. You drown. No exceptions. The first part of the dive went by without a problem. We got to the narrow part of the passage. The exit gap Dave had mentioned earlier. Pushing through was uncomfortable, but I was prepared. Dave had made me practice going through a similar gap in full gear on dry land. The tunnel consisting of printer paper boxes stacked on top of each other. He wasn't taking any risks with a newbie. As I felt the rock brush against me, I was unnerved knowing there were 2 tons of unforgiving earth above me and countless tons below. I felt myself run cold thinking that even with a subtle shift, both could come together and squash me so completely that the only thing left me would be a cloud of murky blood, silt, and shattered bone for Dave to swim through. I tried to control my breathing. Before I knew it, I was through. As Dave made his way through the exit gap, I felt my attention drawn to the squeeze. The hole looked bigger than it did in the video. Darker. It pulled on my flippers, like a toddler tugging for my attention. The pull was an underwater current Dave had warned me about. I didn't even realize I was staring long and hard at the opening until Dave waved his light and got my attention. He was through and ready to move on. I cleared my head and checked my gear. All set, we continued on. The cave opened up into the bell shape, and for the next 20 minutes we looked in awe at rock formations, shined our lights on different oddities, and explored every nook and cranny that caught our attention. Even with our masks on and regulators inserted, I knew that Dave was grinning like a little kid. The energy that he had, even underwater and weighed down with gear, was infectious. He jumped from formation to formation, so quickly I struggled to keep up. He was in his element. The hour we had planned was up too soon. Dave checked his pressure gauge and gave a half-hearted signal that it was time to leave. We started our ascent. We took things slow, making sure to readjust to the pressure. The bends are just as dangerous in cave diving as they are in the open ocean. We finally got to the passageway at the top of the bell and came to the exit gap. Dave went through first. I checked my gear, keeping an eye on my air. I was above 2/3, which was considered within the safety parameters, so I wasn't anxious. It didn't even faze me when it was my turn to push through the gap. I was too busy thinking about all I had seen in the cave below. However, what had freaked me out was getting to the other side and not seeing Dave. At first, I thought he had just gone on ahead, but it was dark except for my dive light, not even a distant beam around the corner. I started wondering if his light had gone out, but when no other light came on, I knew something was off. Dave carried 3 spare lights at all times. Years ago, he had gotten stuck in a cave without a backup and had to pull himself out blind. He was paranoid about it happening again. Then, a horrible realization hit me. Dave went down the wrong path. He had gone down the squeeze. I had taken my eyes off of Dave for a moment to check my air. When I looked up, I couldn't see him, so I had assumed he had already gotten through the exit. I doubled back and forced my way through the gap I had just gone through. The narrowness of the passage now terrified me to full effect as I tried to not get stuck while going through as fast as possible. When my tank scraped against a low-hanging portion, it felt like the earth was warning me, telling me not to go back. I ignored it. I got through. I found the squeeze and looked in. I felt the pull of the current and scanned the darkness. In the distance, I saw the flash of a dive light and a glimpse of a flipper. Dave was in there. For a moment, I hesitated. If Dave got himself into trouble, the only way I would be able to help him was if I went through the tunnel myself. Even Dave didn't even know where it led. It could be a maze of tunnels with plenty of places to get lost. Or it could be a dead end, meaning we'd have to swim out backward and blind since we couldn't turn around. It was dangerous, but I was Dave's dive partner. I was all he had down here. I pushed myself into the squeeze. It was easier than I thought to make progress. The current was stronger inside the tunnel than outside. The slight pull grew to a frightening strength, like 1,000 hands grabbing my body and pulling me forward. I heard the sharp clink of my tanks on the rock, and I prayed none were sharp enough to puncture the metal casing. I was hundreds of feet from the entrance. If my air failed, I was too far to make it back in a single breath. I felt my wetsuit catch on long, rocky protuberances like fingers. One was so sharp it even tore my glove and cut my hand. I winced, putting my dive light on it and watching my blood cloud pulled by the current further into the depths. I swallowed and continued pulling myself forward with my hands, my flippers useless in the tight space. All the while, Dave's light went deeper and deeper into the passage. The squeeze took a downward slope. It got narrower and the current got stronger. I had to take an awkward position to keep my tanks from hitting the sharper rocks. I pressed against the cave wall to fight the flow of water and slow my descent. One of my handholds broke. My stomach dropped. I tumbled forward and was thrown headlong through the squeeze. I closed my eyes and waited to hit a rock, for my tank to burst and for it all to end. Nothing happened. I opened my eyes and looked around. The squeeze had opened up. It was a vast space, so large I couldn't see the walls. The water was black, blacker than it had been in the pool, and seemed to take all light and stop it in its tracks. I couldn't tell up from down. It was like I was lost in space, weightless and isolated. Then I felt the thrumming. It wasn't a sound. It was a movement, like a great beating of wings, or as if the earth itself was trembling. It throbbed through my body at regular intervals, passing through my flesh, my bones, my brain. Slowly, the beat of my heart aligned itself to it. For a long time, I didn't think. I just let the thrumming move through me. It was strangely relaxing. Then Dave's dive light caught my attention. It was moving down, down, down. It was so quick, I knew Dave wasn't sinking. He was actively swimming. I started after him. He was disoriented. He needed to be swimming the other way. I needed to get to him. I needed to save him. I descended fast. paying no attention to how deep I went. I needed to reach Dave. I was panicking. I didn't register the pressure growing on my face, my body, my ears. I didn't notice how cold the water was becoming. Then below me, Dave's light flickered and went out. The thrumming stopped. I had a sudden moment of clarity. I checked my air gauge. It was broken from when I had tumbled through the squeeze. But even without its reading, I knew I was low on oxygen. Dangerously low. I had no idea how long it had been since I had passed through. But I knew it was long enough to be serious. I needed to get out. If I didn't, I would die. But that meant leaving Dave. It took a moment to make the decision. But I reluctantly began to swim back up toward the squeeze. It was tiring. Even in the vastness of space, I felt a current pulling me down, like the entire cavern was a siphon. I dropped weights, trying to lighten my load. I dropped extra lights, unneeded materials. I needed to get out. The thrumming began again and grew stronger. It felt like each of my individual teeth were vibrating. My air started to get a stale taste. I knew it was only a handful of minutes before CO2 poisoning would kick in, and I would start seeing spots. My joints started tingling. I felt tired. I couldn't stop to repressurize. I had to keep going. The air was running out. I reached the roof, and for a heart-stopping moment, I felt panic. I couldn't see the squeeze. But then, a strong current blew past me. I looked toward its source, and there it was, the squeeze, waiting like a gaping, rocky esophagus. I reached the entrance, pulling on the rocks like a manic climber. The current was so strong, it felt like I was lifting 3 people out instead of 1. I traveled hand over hand in the narrow space, feeling the rocks shifting underneath my fingers. I couldn't stop or be cautious. My strength was failing. I had to keep going. I was halfway up the passage when one last thrum went through my body. It shook me to my core, each bone reverberating like ripples on a pond. There was silence. Then a searing pain ripped through my head. It felt like a railroad spike was being jammed into my ear. The pain was so bad, it almost made me spit out my regulator. I bit so hard, the plastic casing cracked. The world began to spin, like those teacup rides at amusement parks. I couldn't get it to slow down. It took all I had to cling to the rocks, trying to ride out the pulses of pain that racked my head with every heartbeat. As I tried to manage the pain, my only dive light flickered once, then twice, and then failed. I was in the dark. I couldn't think. Everything was spinning, and everything ached. It took tremendous effort even to breathe. On instinct, I pulled myself forward, hand over hand, rock by rock. It felt like I was working against a hurricane. The passage grew narrower and more sharp rocks punctured my wet suit, feeling like digging claws grasping me, holding me back. I ripped through them. Each gasp of air felt thinner and thinner. Still I climbed, hands trembling. Flippers helplessly digging into the sidewalls. When the bright spots appeared in my darkened vision, I prepared myself for death. Then I felt my hand burst out into an open space. Powered by adrenaline, I pulled myself out. It took every remaining ounce of my strength. I fumbled around on the cave wall, and panicked again when I felt only rocks. Then I felt a small piece of nylon, the guide rope. I touched it gently, not wanting to tear from the wall. I found the exit gap and pulled myself through. It felt like I was being born again. The world was still spinning, but the current had reduced to its earlier innocent gentle pulling. I got away as fast as I could. I followed the guideline up through the passage and finally to the dry cave. I broke the surface of the underground pool, tore out my regulator, and took in deep breaths of wet air. It took an hour to crawl out and call the police. I passed out mid-phone call. It took another hour for them to arrive. They got me into a hyperbaric chamber as soon as they could, but the damage was done. I had gotten an air bubble in my inner ear and a severe case of the bends. Any sense of balance I had was destroyed. I couldn't stand up on my own, and most of the movement in my hands was gone. I would need to learn to walk again. But that wasn't even the worst part. I contacted Dave's friends and told them what happened. They set up a recovery dive so they could get their friend's body. No one kidded themselves. Dave was dead. He had been in the cave for a week at that point. His friends hoped that the gases in his decomposing corpse would bring it up to the top of the squeeze's cavern. making things easier and safer. But when they got to the cave, they found something even worse than Dave's bloated body. The squeeze was missing. They showed me the footage. Its opening had been replaced by smooth rock. No trace of the crag that had been there before. Dave, in his secrecy, had told only one of his friends about the squeeze. The rest questioned if it had even existed. They went through Dave's footage at my request, and even there, the video had changed. What had once shown the squeeze now showed just a smooth face of rock. They searched the rest of the cave. Nothing. The place where Dave had died no longer existed. Everyone thought I was lying. Only one of Dave's friends believed me. The one Dave had confided in about the secret cave and the squeeze. He tried to get the others off my back, but it wasn't long before a police report was filed. I was accused of murdering Dave. After a year-long investigation, and the police finding no motive or evidence, the charges were dropped. It's been 3 years now. I've lost contact with most of the people I knew in the diving community. I sold my diving gear and focused on healing, learning to walk again and regaining some of the use of my fingers. I've been content to stay on dry land, work my 9 to 5, and try to forget what happened that day in the cave. But recently, I've been thinking about the squeeze. Sometimes at night, I'm back in the expanse. I feel the thrumming, the pulse of the earth. I close my eyes, and instead of cold, I feel warmth. I feel the water itself embrace me, and despite the ache of my old injuries, I feel whole. I open my eyes and see Dave swimming up to meet me. He doesn't wear gear, and he's full of that same little kid energy that was so infectious. The energy that convinced me to try cave diving. He opens his mouth to tell me something. Then I wake up. Last week, I began repurchasing diving equipment, stocking up on lights, air, a suit. Got about 1,000 feet of guide rope and a spool. Have to make sure I'm prepared. I'm going back in. There's something waiting for me there. If I get back, I'll let you know how it goes. Story 9. I bought a fixer-upper I couldn't afford not to buy. I should have asked more questions. It was awful being laid off so suddenly, but it didn't take me too long to find a new administration job. The new job didn't pay as well as my old job, but I hoped the salary was enough that I could keep my house. After racking up $5,000 in credit card debt over the next few months, even though it broke my heart, I decided I had to move. I called my realtor and told her that my daughter, Leela, and I needed to find someplace else to live. I looked at houses all over Madison, but even the houses I didn't like were more than I could afford. I'd nearly given up when my realtor showed me the house at 937 Maple Drive. Seeing it, I felt like my prayers had been answered. The house was in the same neighborhood as Leela's and my old house. It was only a 10-minute walk to Leela's school. It had 2 bedrooms, just like our old house, and a big basement for Leela to play in. It's a bit of a fixer-upper, my realtor said, but it has a lot of potential. Is your husband good with his hands? I'm single, I said, a little offended he'd asked me that. Who used to live in the house? A nice, older couple, Martha and Rupert. Martha was a teacher here in town. Her husband, Rupert, worked as an auto mechanic. Why are they selling their house for so little money? They're not selling it. The bank is. Martha passed away, and then Rupert, from what I heard, he just disappeared. Disappeared? The neighbors hadn't seen him for a while. They worried something had happened to him. So they called the police. The police searched the house, but he wasn't there. They think he moved in with some of his relatives in Nebraska and just didn't tell anybody. He stopped making his mortgage payments, and the bank repossessed the house and put it on the market. The story seemed strange, but I didn't think too much of it. If I were older and struggling to pay my mortgage, I could picture myself running from my bills, too. Who cares about good credit when you only have a few years left to live? The house was just too good of a deal to pass up. I'm not that handy, but the repairs didn't look too hard. I'd repaint everything. change the doors and windows, sand and restain the hardwood. I'd never done any work like that before, but nowadays, you can learn how to do everything on YouTube. Whatever repairs I couldn't do myself. As soon as I managed to save some money, I'd hire a contractor to do the work. The first few weeks after Leela and I moved into the house were great. We unpacked our things and settled in. But then I started noticing even more little problems I hadn't noticed before. Water leaked out from the dishwasher. Whenever I ran it, the pipes creaked all night long. The bathroom light flickered whenever I turned it on, no matter how many times I changed the bulb. None of these problems were too bad, but they were enough to keep me up at night, worrying I'd made a big mistake by buying a house and not just renting an apartment. At night, I keep hearing scratching noises in the basement. Leela told me. It's an old house, sweetheart, I said. Old houses make a lot of noises. My next-door neighbor, Janine, was an older woman about the same age as my mom. Not much longer after Leela and I moved in, she introduced herself and asked how Leela and I were doing. The house is a big project. I told her. I thought I'd be up for it, but now I'm not so sure. Fixing everything wrong with this house is going to take a lot more work than I thought it would. I hope I didn't make a huge mistake. Do you have anybody in your family who's handy? All my family lives in Chicago. I'm the only one out here in Wisconsin. I'm sure you'll get the house looking the way you want it to sooner than you think. It's a great house. I knew the old owners pretty well. That house was everything to them. They bought it brand new and lived in it for close to 60 years. The husband, Rupert, always had some kind of renovation project he was working on. I heard he left to live with some family in Nebraska. That's what they said. What I think, though, I think they just haven't found his body yet. What do you mean? Rupert depended on Martha for everything. After she died, he wasn't the same. He loved going for long walks on the trails in the state forest. I think he went out for one of his long walks and just didn't come back. I tried my best to ignore all the little problems in that house, but after another month of leaking water and flickering lights and creaking pipes, I couldn't take it anymore. I watched a few YouTube videos and tried to start fixing things myself. I didn't have much luck, though, no matter how easy the YouTube videos made it look. It was always harder when I did it, right as I was about to give up and beg the bank to take the house back. Though, something strange happened. All the little problems in the house started fixing themselves. I ran the dishwasher and no water leaked out. I turned on the bathroom light, and the light didn't flicker anymore. It's incredible, I told Janine. It's like the house is fixing itself. Of course, I didn't really believe that. I told myself the dishwasher had somehow managed to tighten its own pipes back together. The wires in the bathroom had miraculously uncrossed themselves. Looking back, I feel so dumb now. Other strange things started happening around the house. 2. I swore I'd close my bedroom door before leaving for work. I hated Leela going into my room. But when I got home, the door would be open. I never misplaced my clothes, but every now and then a shirt or a pair of my pants would go missing. Every time I went to the basement to do a load of laundry, I'd swear I'd turned the lights off. But then I'd look downstairs later that night, and all the lights would be on. Then, right as all the little problems to finally be gone, an even bigger problem appeared. After a big storm, I woke up Friday morning to find a big puddle of water on my kitchen floor. Rain had dripped through the roof and made its way right through the kitchen ceiling. Seeing all the water damage made me feel sick. I imagined mold spreading through all the wood and drywall in the house, Leela breathing all the mold particles into her tiny lungs. I called every roofer in Madison until I finally got someone come over right away and look at the damage. I can fix your roof, the roofer said, and your kitchen ceiling, too, but it's going to cost a few thousand. I could have paid a few hundred, maybe, but not a few thousand. I told the roofer I'd think about it. But I couldn't pay. I didn't know what to do. Friday night, I couldn't sleep. I just lay in bed, imagining the mold spreading through the house, rotting the wood until the house finally collapsed in on itself. Around 2 a.m., I was finally drifting off when I heard what sounded like someone banging a hammer on my roof. I ran outside. The moon was shining. I could see the roof clearly. There was nobody up there. No people, no animals. Strange, I thought. Even stranger. On Sunday it rained again and nothing happened. I stood in the kitchen with a bucket, nervously waiting for the water to start dripping to the ceiling again, but it never did. I crawled up to the attic with a flashlight and shone the light over the underside of the roof. Somehow, the roof wasn't leaking anymore. I noticed a step ladder right above the kitchen ceiling where the water had gotten through 2 days before. I swore the attic was empty when the house inspector went up there, but I told myself the step ladder must have always been there. I got my laptop and looked through the report the inspector had sent me. I found the pictures of my attic, and I was right. The ladder wasn't there. How did it get there? I called the police. You're saying that somebody is breaking into your house and fixing things? The officer asked. Well, I didn't fix the leak myself, I said. And you're sure the roof was leaking? Look at this big water stain. I pointed at the big brown stain on the ceiling. I explained that I didn't know anybody, family or friend, who would come by to fix the roof for me, but the officer didn't believe me. He talked to some neighbors, and they hadn't seen anybody coming in or out of my house either. And so he went on his way. I bought a security camera and put it over my front door. For the next few weeks, I checked the camera footage every day after work, trying to figure out if anybody was stalking me. The people I saw in the footage were all neighbors, though nobody seemed out of place. I started to relax again. I know it sounds dumb now, but I told myself that maybe the roof wasn't leaking. It was just a really bad storm that somehow caused water to get under the shingles at one time. I was losing my mind from all the unfinished renovation stress and making little problems worse than they actually were. As soon as I started to relax again, though, another problem appeared. The thermostat went crazy. The temperature in the house shot up to 104 degrees. No matter how many times I lowered it back to 72, the temperature climbed back up to 104. I called an electrician to look at the thermostat, but just like the roofer, he wanted more money to fix it than I could pay. So I decided Leela and I would just have to live with the heat. We slept on top of our sheets, sweating through the night. Then on our third night trying to sleep in that horrible heat, I woke up to Leela screaming, "There's someone in the living room." I ran into the hallway. Leela stood next to the kitchen, looking toward the basement stairs. I grabbed her arm, carried her into the bathroom, locked the door, and called the police. 2 police officers arrived 15 minutes later. "Where did you see this man?" one of the officers asked. Leela pointed at the thermostat. He was right there. He wasn't wearing any clothes. On the floor in front of the thermometer, I noticed a rusted screwdriver. The number on the thermometer was back at 72. The thermometer was working again. The police officers searched all through the house, but they didn't find anyone. The doors and windows were still locked. They checked my camera, but nobody had gone anywhere near the front door or my front lawn. There was just a thermostat, somehow fixed, and then that screwdriver. Maybe this house is haunted, I told Janine the next morning while we drank our coffee. "At least you have helpful ghosts," she said. "Ones that want to fix things. I wish I had ghosts like those." She leaned closer to me. "You're sure someone isn't stalking you?" I'm a paranoid person. I'd notice if someone was following me around. Someone from work, maybe? I see the same 4 people every day, and they all seem normal. Just be careful. Leela and I were both pretty shaken by what had happened. As frightening as the whole experience was, though, it was great to have the house back to a normal temperature again. The next few nights, I slept in Leela's bed with her until she felt safe again. After she started normally again, I went back to my old bed, but unlike Leela, I couldn't sleep. All night, I just lay awake, listening to the sounds in the house. The pipes contracting, the house's walls moaning, the overgrown tree branches rattling against the windows. A few more months passed, October to November and into December. The temperature dropped to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, and then one of the worst things that could have happened in that house happened. In the dead of winter, January 10th, the oil furnace went dead. The house couldn't heat itself anymore. I bought a few electric heaters from Walmart and put them in every room in the house, but still, I was worried Leela and I were going to freeze to death while we were sleeping. I called about 30 furnace repair companies, but they all told me the same thing. It would cost at least 20 grand to fix it. I had no idea when I'd be able to get that much money saved. 10 years? 20 years? Could I pay in installments? I asked them, but they all told me the same thing. Cash or check. I called my parents in Chicago. I hate asking them for money, but I didn't know what else to do. I'll pay you back as soon as I can, I promised them. Mom and Dad said they'd see what they could do. I knew they'd probably be taking out a loan for it. I would have done that myself if my credit wasn't wrecked. I felt horrible, embarrassed and dumb. The next night, I lay in bed, regretting every decision I'd made, feeling like my whole life was falling apart, when I heard a loud bang in the basement. It didn't sound like pipes contracting. It sounded like someone banging metal against metal. I sat up, my heart racing. Maybe it is just the pipes, I told myself. Maybe they've frozen so bad they've started to crack. Then I heard the sound again. I got out of bed and put on my slippers. I picked up my phone, turned on the flashlight, and went into the hall. I checked on Leela first. She was sleeping in her bed. The sound rang out again. Clang, clang. It was coming from the basement, from the furnace room. I tiptoed downstairs. The furnace room lights were on. Leela and I were never down there. Why were those lights always on? I've called the police. I shouted. I have them on the phone with me. Whoever you are, you better leave now. I never thought I'd be so hopeful to see burst water pipes. I poked my head into the furnace room, praying I'd see water everywhere. I didn't see any water, though. The pipes were fine. A decrepit-looking old man knelt next to the furnace, holding a rusted wrench. He wore nothing but filthy underwear. His skin was caked with dirt. The ends of his fingers were bloodied. He looked at me, smiling, his lips parted over his stained yellow teeth. "Sorry if I woke you, Samantha," he said. "I'm just trying to get this furnace up and running again. It's so cold outside. If I don't get this fixed soon, all these pipes are going to freeze and burst." He knew my name. How the hell did he know my name? I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I was frozen, too terrified to move. He stood, his hammer in his hand, and walked toward me. "Who are you?" I managed to ask him. "My name's Rupert. This is my house. It's been so lonely here since Martha died. It's so good having other people around the house again." Still smiling, he took another step forward. "I thought I'd die here alone," he said. "When you and your daughter moved in, though, I was so happy. I noticed you struggling, though. It must be hard on your own with no man in the house to take care of you. This is an old house. There are so many problems. You really need a man around to help." He took another few steps forward. Now, he was close enough to me that he could hit me with his hammer now. That's all I could picture. His hammer coming down on my head. "What do you want?" I stuttered. "I want you and your daughter to enjoy this house as much as I have," he said. "I want you to be happy here." I thought of Leela sleeping upstairs, and I finally snapped myself out of it. I screamed as loud as I could, and then ran upstairs, woke up Leela, rushed her out of the house, and called the police. The neighbors' lights lit up one after the other. Janine came outside to find out what was going on. Before I knew it, the whole street was filled with police cars. It turned out that the old owner, Rupert, never left the house after his wife died. When the bank started sending him letters about missed mortgage payments, he moved his mattress underneath the basement stairs, made himself a little bedroom, and closed it off with some drywall. He was able to sneak out of the room by squeezing behind the drywall, eventually coming out into the dry storage room. The cops searched his room and told me they'd found all my missing clothes, along with a few half-eaten mice carcasses and some bottles of piss. I sold the house as soon as I could find a buyer. Then Leela and I moved in with my parents in Chicago. If I learned anything from this experience, it's that I'm never going to buy a fixer-up again. I don't care how good of a deal the house is. No price is worth the headache. Story 10. My boyfriend receives calls every morning. Recently, they've gotten threatening. November 19th, 24. Hi. So, I don't really know how to start these things, but I thought I would post my story here, seeing as most people won't believe me anyway. It all started just over a month ago. To paint you a picture, my boyfriend, he pays me. Let's call him Kingston, was a flattering man. Even if he didn't send me money, I might have still noticed him. That was the thing about Kingston. He grew up rich. The man hadn't touched his doorknobs in years. He would flaunt his money left and right. He paid me a small fortune to spend time with him and sleep at his mansion. I felt like a bit of a whore at first, but got used to it fairly quickly. I actually became fond of the man. He did a lot of odd things with his money, things I hadn't heard other rich people doing before. One such thing was having a private FM channel on the radio, where he would have voice actors call in every morning as a sort of alarm clock. The voice actors, mostly women, would call in and say something nice about Kingston, generally complimenting his dashing looks, his money and influence, or just simply telling him how good he was. It was the most obnoxious thing I had ever seen in my 24 years. I was still a university student, despite Kingston offering to buy me out, and had never seen anyone do anything like that. The first morning I had woken up in his bed, I thought there was someone else in the room. In the beginning, I would wander the endless halls of his mansion. It took about a week to finally see every room. I would explore every weird and wonderful room I came across, making a note of which direction I come from. It was incredibly easy to get lost. I would generally act sheepishly in front of the butlers and maids as I stumbled into the most bizarre rooms. I mean, seriously, who needs 2 planetariums? There were enough guest rooms that the building could easily be mistaken for a hotel. My favorite rooms were the aquarium, which had a glass tunnel you could walk through to watch the schools of fish swim over you, and a glass floor with a rather creepy-looking eel. I also loved the museum. It was filled with all sorts of ancient artifacts that did an awesome job at creeping me out. There were Aztec shields and spears, medieval armor sets, and statues galore. There was one statue that would always send a shiver down my spine just looking at it. It was a tall man in a cloak. The statue had no hair whatsoever, not even eyebrows. Its pupilless eyes always seemed to watch me walk around the room. The man stood perfectly upright, and perched on his shoulder was a crow. Kingston had plaques made for every artifact with a short description of what it was and what time period it was from. For the statue, however, there was no time period. All the plaque read was, "The man for whom the crows follow." It is believed that the culture of the statue's origin believed it to be some sort of reaper or omen of death. Date unknown. I loved all the mysteries that the mansion had to offer. I even started to get used to that narcissistic excuse for an alarm clock. However, it wasn't long before the voices started to change. October 20th, 24. One morning I woke up to heavy breathing. It sounded like a broken car trying to start. It was dry, heavy and rough. In my semi-conscious state, I believed it to be Kingston sleeping. As I rolled over to tell him to be quiet, my arm missed his chest and landed on the warm bed sheets. He was already sitting up. Kingston looked quizzically at the radio from which the breathing was emanating. He got out of bed in search of one of his servants. He didn't like it when things didn't go his way. I heard him sternly telling some poor servant to get the voice actor on the phone. So that was my morning. Later on at lunch, a servant, let's call him Alfred, I usually read a lot of comics, brought Kingston a message saying that the voice actor wouldn't answer phone. Instead of acting worried, Kingston just waved Alfred away and told him to get a replacement voice. I was a little shocked at the whole ordeal, but continued eating without a word. Best not to bother Kingston when he's grumpy. During the evening, the news came on. They were talking about a recent murder not far from where we lived. And lo and behold, there was Kingston's voice actor. She looked pretty. I could see why she got the part. Furious with the news, Kingston immediately contacted the police. October 21st, 24. The following day, a couple of officers arrived at the mansion to talk with Kingston and ask some questions. I remember one of them remarking that, "This place is freaking wicked." A little out of left field for a police officer, I thought. The officer sat down with us and asked the usual questions you'd hear in the movies. They were perplexed with Kingston's alarm clock situation. I couldn't really answer much as I didn't know the woman, but Kingston answered the questions very apathetically. Once the officers had finished taking notes, Kingston sat forward and clasped his hands together, making eye contact with the officers for the first time since we sat down. How did Thalia die? The lead police officer sighed and looked toward the ground. Violently. How, specifically? I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer, but I stayed by Kingston all the same. It is believed that the killer placed a heated metal ball into her mouth before taping it shut. The killer displayed her body on a makeshift crucifix. Our detectives believe she was martyred as some kind of warning. Fuck. Kingston sat wide-eyed. I felt ill. It seems fairly obvious that this was some sort of religious killing, but we don't know why or how Thalia was chosen. November 16th, 24. We continued to receive calls over the next few weeks. It was usually about 2 to 3 a week and always the same dry, raspy breathing way too close to the microphone. It was like the stranger was just trying to be there, make himself known. I'm not ashamed to admit this, but since the calls started, I had become afraid of the dark again. It never felt like I was alone. Each alarm recording was taken as evidence to the police and was of no help whatsoever. One morning when I woke up, the sound echoing around the room was extraordinarily loud. Kingston's top-tier audio system made it feel like the source of the sound was in a room with you. It always made me shiver no matter the voice, but this was worse, much worse. The voice was dry and raspy like the owner spoke with a neck stoma. He said, "When I come, will you let me in?" There was the start of a muffled scream as the phone cut off. I didn't know how to react to what I had just heard, so I did the only reasonable thing I could think of. I pulled my knees into my chest and started to cry. Kingston wasn't much consolation either. He sat upright in bed and swore a lot. After the two of us had calmed down a little, I told Kingston that I was leaving for my parents. I couldn't stand waking up to any other messages or hearing about any more deaths. I told Kingston that I would come back when this was all over. He grabbed my wrist, not in an aggressive way, although his grip was tight enough that it hurt a little. But when I looked into his eyes, I could see a desperation in them. He was already sweating profusely. He must have been having a bad dream before, possibly about the murder. I desperately wanted to leave, but seeing him like this, I couldn't. I couldn't leave him to deal with all of this by himself. Against my better judgment, I decided to stay. November 19th, 24. A few days had passed with nothing out of the ordinary happening, but Kingston was still on edge. He was paranoid about everything. He slept with the lights on now. He told me he felt like the shadows weren't shadows. Whatever that meant. Within a day, he had hired an entire security team to keep 24-hour surveillance around his mansion. He vowed to keep both of us safe, no matter how much it cost. I had never realized it until now, but I was starting to catch feelings for him. Besides his money and looks, I actually cared for the man. We were sitting in the living room when there was a call from security telling us that the police were at the main gate. It was the same officers from before. They were still just as impressed with the mansion size. Before letting the officers in, Kingston discreetly told me not to mention the last alarm we had received. They just don't need to know about it, okay? He had said. We sat with the officers, and they told us what we had expected since their arrival. Someone else was dead. Another of Kingston's voice actors went missing about 5 days ago. Her body was found this morning. It was in the same state as the last. The officer said that if the post-mortem is similar to the last, it will find that she was alive throughout the entire process. A horrible way to go, said the sergeant. It was at that moment that I thought back to the scream just before the alarm shut off. I completely broke down and told the police everything about that morning. Kingston shot me a slightly annoyed look, which let me know there would be a conversation later. The officers looked at each other simultaneously and brought out their notepads. After a couple of hours, they finished up and left. I turned to Kingston after closing the door. He stood in the foyer livid. Why would you tell them that? After I specifically told you not to. It was the right thing to do. Why wouldn't you want to tell them? For Christ's sake, another woman is dead. Kingston had developed an infatuation with solving this case himself. He never liked or trusted the police, which I thought to be stupid. Despite how ludicrous I found the idea, I never challenged it. November 22nd, 24. Kingston's been up for the last few days, barely an hour of sleep in between. I've been helping him set up a super improvised pen board with notes and photos cluttered around. It looked like something out of a movie where a retired detective is helping out on the case of his life. Bar the string between photos and notes. Although I would like to see that added. Both of us are incredibly tired now. I'd like to get some sleep, but Kingston insists all the lights stay on. November 29th, 24. A week has passed now. The pen board has grown. There have been 2 more murders and a missing woman. All the same way. No more messages have been left to us, but the last 2 voice actors have been taken into protective custody. We not only have our security team providing 24-hour surveillance around the mansion, but now the police too. I guess it does pay to be rich. Since Kingston's remaining voice actors were taken into protective custody, we had just gotten used to a long lie-in until this morning when we were awoken by another alarm. This time it started off normal. A woman's voice came over the radio, which at first I didn't realize was wrong. I listened to her say the usual things to Kingston. Time to wake up. You've got a big day ahead of you. Her voice cracked at the end of the last line. She began to sob. Not long to wait now. I could hear her voice tremble. He'll be there soon. When he arrives, will you let him in? Will you worship him? Will you present him with the gift of your flesh? I know Dash. She started crying. A similar dry voice could be heard in the background. Finish the line, Bethany. It's all right. He sounded relaxed, like he was trying to soothe her, despite his coarse voice. I know I will. Screaming echoed around the room, and through my head before the alarm cut off. My head was spinning. I stumbled towards the ensuite, but didn't make it in time. I vomited all over the floor. Kingston sat in bed still, unfazed by my collapse, staring at the wall in anger. I noticed his hand slowly come out from under his pillow. June 12th, 24. It's been a week since the last call. Kingston has been adamant to remove our police protection. He insisted that his security team were the best of the best. The law really did make him uncomfortable. I don't know how Kingston made all of his money, but I'm willing to bet that not all of it was legal. Every night when we go to bed, Kingston has been sitting in our room taking notes and playing the recordings of each alarm. The last thing I would hear before bed each night was, "When I come, will you let me in?" Click. "When I come, will you let me in?" Click. "When I come, will you let me in?" Click. It drove me crazy. Kingston continued this every night for a little over a week. Kingston was obsessed with trying to decipher that damn riddle. I never realized how tense up I always was until a few moments before I would fall asleep. In those short few moments, I knew bliss. My body would uncoil like a spring loosening. It would feel as though a heavy weight I had forgotten I was carrying had been lifted from my body. That's what I would look forward to most all day, every day. One night, I was lying in bed and was awoken by the usual click of the recorder playing. "When I come, will you let me in?" I finally decided to say something. I rolled over to face Kingston's desk in order to give him a piece of my mind. When I turned, however, my arm pressed against his sleeping body. My eyes widened and my throat closed. I had finally found out that my fight or flight response was more akin to that of a deer in headlights. I lay for what felt like minutes convincing myself into thinking I was just on edge. It seemed to be working until I heard the click of the recorder stopping. I felt fear like no other. I was angry at Kingston. How could he not be awake? I wished to wake him up more than anything. I hoped that somehow if I wanted it enough he would sense the fact and wake up, but nothing happened. My gut wrenched when I felt the bed behind me start to sink. Someone was climbing on, in what I assumed were my last moments. All I could muster was a defeated whimper. I felt a warm breath on the back of my neck and the foulest smell imaginable, like rotting fish. The breath crept up my neck, tickling each hair on the way, and into my ear. It prickled the inside of my ear canal. I could only grip the covers tighter. In that damn dry and raspy voice came words that will haunt me until the end of my days. "I'm here now." At that, Kingston jolted up, his hand coming out from underneath his pillow. There were 3 flashes of light and deafening bangs before the breath stopped and a muffled thump came from behind me. Kingston switched on his side table lamp and got out of bed, keeping his gun pointed behind me. I still lay frozen, now staring at the empty space Kingston had just been laying. It was clear I wasn't thinking straight, because despite everything I wanted him back in that spot more than anything. Kingston tried to speak to me, but every word was a mumble. My ears were numb. I think he was celebrating the kill. I noticed that life was starting to return to my body, even if it was only trembling. There was a thud behind me and one more flash and bang. The room lit up once more, and I knew something was very wrong. Kingston's victory monologue stopped. I felt the breath return to my ear, and I froze up once more. Don't be troubled. It is time. A pain hit the back of my head, and I saw spots before they faded to black. I awoke tied to a chair and with my mouth gagged. It was hard to concentrate on anything at first, but I came to realize that we were in the museum. Statues and Aztec masks never looked so fear-inducing. This was the first time I got a look at the source of our paranoia. He wasn't a million miles away from what I thought he would look like. He was bald, with no eyebrows or eyelashes. His skin riddled with cuts. Each cut was precisely placed like they meant something. His body was a canvas for carnage. He wore only torn cargo pants and was covered in dirt and grime. He appeared as though he had been crawling through a dumpster or a sewer. Some of his open wounds were infected and swollen. They had turned purple and leaked yellow pus. He had 3 bullet hole scars on his torso, all of which looked old, but that was impossible. There was still wet blood staining his chest and belly, and it definitely wasn't ours. "At last I have the honor of gazing upon you," he said. "I have been waiting for this moment, Dash." He stopped. His entire body shook and his face lit up for a second. The man regained his composure and continued, "For so long." Kingston was tied to a chair next to me, but the man wasn't looking at either of us. He was looking over us. I turned my head the best I could to find the source of his interest. We were sitting at the base of a statue. The imposing figure stood perfectly upright with a crow resting on his shoulder. For some reason, looking at the statue made my panic worse. Despite being made of stone, it always felt as though it had some sort of authority. It's hard to explain. Contrary to earlier on, I had never wanted to talk so much. With a cloth gag cutting into the sides of my mouth, I couldn't manage more than muffled screams. There is no point calling for anyone, my sweet. Nobody will come. The only one that is here for you forever and always is my master. Be not afraid, for soon we will all be united in his blessed presence. He spoke calmly, like he was trying to convince us to go along with it. The cuts underneath his eyes seemed to smile as he did. He walked over to Kingston and bowed. "You will make a good offering. The blood of the keeper and the blood of the loyalists." Kingston tried to rock his chair, but the man grasped his shoulder and held him still. All the fire had left his eyes. He looked terrified. At this point I was crying. Kingston was too. The man turned around and unfolded a leather toolkit with scalpels, a blowtorch, coal tongs, and a metal ball. He will rise once more. He who has gifted me cures to my ailments. He who has bestowed much insight. He has been with me every step of the way. A guiding embrace, a fire on the cold nights, a shadow cast on the wall. He is glorious, is he not? The man fired up his blowtorch and clasped the metal ball in the prongs. Kingston had gone limp. He looked catatonic. I was doing my very best to pull my hands free from the rope, but couldn't manage it. My wrists felt hot. I felt blood run down the palm of my hands and drip off my fingertips. Our torturer turned around, holding a glowing orange ball in the tongs. He approached Kingston, who was still unresponsive. He used his free hand to remove Kingston's gag. As he pulled it out of his mouth, Kingston jerked his head forward and crunched down on the man's finger. The scarred man howled and recoiled, pulling his hand from Kingston's face, one finger shy. Kingston spat out a wad of blood and a finger with 2 teeth attached. He tilted his head back and smiled a bloody smile. The scarred man stared at his finger and slowly composed himself. I could tell he was struggling. He marched over to Kingston and pressed the ball into his cheek ferociously. I could hear Kingston's flesh sizzle louder than his screams. The ball melted through his cheek and into his mouth. That lunatic let the ball drop into his mouth. He kept Kingston's head tilted back. All I could hear was a scream piercing through my concussed head. It was short-lived, though, as Kingston's vocal cords must have given out or been melted away. He went limp a couple of seconds after. The man took a scalpel and cut open Kingston's lifeless belly. Delicately, he collected the blood in a bowl. I couldn't watch anymore. I don't know where it came from. I'll probably never experience it again. But a sudden wave of adrenaline surged my body. I used my toes to push the chair back, toppling it over. The antique chair shattered, and I felt two of my fingers fold the wrong way. But the adrenaline sheltered me from the pain. My hands were still tied to loose pieces of wood, but now I could move. I used all my effort to rise to my feet and make a dash to the door. My head was spinning. I could make out 3 blurry doors waving in my vision. I reached out and felt the handle. Throwing the door off its hinges, I bolted from the museum and down the corridor. Unfortunately, I noticed something I wished I hadn't. Nobody was chasing me. What I did next, I can't really explain. Maybe it was some human urge. Maybe it was curiosity or overconfidence. I decided to go back to the room. Something was compelling me, calling me to the room. I knew it was a stupid thing to do. There were alarm bells ringing in my head like crazy, and yet I approached the museum all the same. The pain in my fingers was starting to return. I crept toward the museum door on the balls of my feet, ready to run. I leaned around the door and saw that the man was still standing with Kingston about 50 feet from the door. He was using his blood to paint marks on himself, Kingston's corpse, and the statue. The marks were strange. I had never seen symbols like them before. He didn't look as though he had even noticed my escape. Finishing his work, the scarred man stepped back to admire his painting. Taking a scalpel, he slit the palms of his hands and wiped them down his cheeks and neck. He said something strange that I couldn't make out. A wave of depression washed over my body. I had no idea why. I felt as though there was no point in anything. A deep sadness consumed me. I didn't care if I died at that moment, even though I knew I should. The lamps around the room seemed to get dimmer, as if the shadows wrestled the light into submission. Color seemed to leave the room, like there would never be happiness again. My breath floated out in front of me, and every hair on my body stood up at once. Whatever was happening, I knew I had to see it, even if it cost me my life. With a loud cracking sound, the statue stepped off its podium. Standing at 7 foot tall, it was no longer made of stone, although it was still the same shade of dark gray. The crow looked around the room and squawked. The scarred man fell to his knees, hands extended, creating a bowl. He cried tears of joy. The used-to-be statue took 2 lumbering steps towards him and rested his hand on the side of the man's face, caressing it. In a flash, his large hand clamped shut, crushing half of the man's skull in his hand. The perched crow hopped off his shoulder and pecked away at the body, dragging the reluctant eye out of its socket. The statue turned towards the other doors and pushed them off their hinges with ease, leaving. September 12th, 24. It's been a few days since my last post. Since then, I no longer feel that depression. It's been slowly fading. However, the world still seems a slightly darker place now. My fingers are healing. I had a total of 10 stitches from my concussion, and I am struggling to type. So I'll keep this post short. Kingston's funeral is next Tuesday. Life is going to be very different without him. I have left California and am staying with my parents in Louisiana. The police didn't know what to make of the situation and obviously didn't believe my story. To anyone reading this, please be careful. I don't know what that thing is and what it's capable of, but it's out there somewhere. If you notice a murder crows, take my warning and look over your shoulder regularly.